Hey everybody, and welcome to Breaking Biotech, the podcast that we get into all things biotech. My name is Matt, and thanks a lot for joining me today. If you like what I'm doing, please like, subscribe, or leave a comment below. Today I'm going to talk about Biogen and the controversy related to the results that they just put out for their Phase 2 trial looking at preventing Alzheimer's disease progression with BAN2401. So I'm not going to get into my portfolio, although if anybody just saw the XBI close, it was a devastating day. Maybe I shouldn't be too dramatic, but devastating, down by like 2.5%. But I'm pretty much down in everything after this week, and I just think it's money flows into different sectors based on what's going on geopolitically. But I'm going to keep this talk focused on Alzheimer's disease and neurodegeneration, and we're going to talk about what went on with their trial and what we should expect moving forward. So for those who haven't been following the story, Biogen is a company that is in partner with Eisai, which is a Japanese biotech company as well, and they have they're a pretty big company, and they're involved in many different things, but the most important, at least for today's video, is neurodegeneration. So people have been looking for a good Alzheimer's drug for a long time. The standard of care right now is only to treat the symptoms, and that's done with Aricept or donepezil, which is an acetylcholinesterase inhibitor, and that's able to alleviate a lot of the symptoms, but it doesn't change the disease progression. So there have been a lot of attempts to see whether or not we can actually affect change in the disease outcome, and we don't entirely know what causes the disease, but we kind of know what its characteristics are. So I don't have a good image here to illustrate Alzheimer's disease, but basically what ends up happening is you get an accumulation of amyloid plaques in your brain, and what goes on from there is you get a lot of neuron cell death that's associated with memory neurons and neurons associated with cognition, and that eventually progresses and you get more and more brain degeneration, and then you die. So we don't know exactly what we don't know what causes this, and there's a few hypotheses that are out there. There's obviously genetic factors that are involved in this, and the main genetic thing is the ApoE epsilon 4 variant. So if you're positive for that, you're more likely to get Alzheimer's disease. And this is actually relevant for our talk today because we'll see how this ApoE4 population is going to make the data look better than it really should. And a lot of people have pointed this out, so I'm not going to be pointing out anything too new, but I think it's, we can make some predictions based on what it is. So there's a genetic cause, and then people think either that the amyloid hypothesis is of most relevance, or the tau hypothesis. So the amyloid hypothesis is that this amyloid precursor protein gets processed into amyloid beta, and this amyloid beta for some reason ends up forming oligomers, which then forms these protofibrils and then fibrils, and this becomes neurotoxic for the neurons, and the neurons eventually start to function incorrectly and then die. So Biogen has many different products that they're trying to push through clinical trials in order to target this hypothesis, and a lot of them are antibodies, and they'll bind to different forms of the A beta fibrils or oligomers, and then the body's able to metabolize them and get them out of the brain. So, and that's if that is the cause of Alzheimer's. And there's been a lot of research done on this, and some of the antibodies that have previously been done, and I think Lilly is one company that did one, they were successful in Phase 2 and they failed in Phase 3. So, and that's what the topic of discussion is today regarding the Phase 2 data that came out. But before I get into that, the tau hypothesis is another one, and Biogen also has some anti-tau antibodies that they're putting through to try and alleviate that part of the problem. So what happens in the tau hypothesis is that this protein ends up getting hyperphosphorylated for some reason, and it forms these neurofibrillary tangles, and these tangles form aggregates that can also be neurotoxic, and that leads to the cell death and the loss of cognition and memory. So there's good data to suggest that both of them can occur in this disease, at least in the preclinical area, but clinically we don't really know, and there's been mixed signals regarding whether or not either one is the cause or a mix of both. And so Biogen, at least for today's talk, this is the company website. It's really nice. So they're a big company, and they have products out there already. The one I'm not going to get into too much, but Spinraza has been approved for SMA, which we've talked about, because Alexion has a product that they're putting through to try and treat that disease with an AAV vector. But Spinraza has actually been approved, and it's a really expensive and powerful medication to prevent SMA. So they're making money, which is good, and we're not going to talk too much about the financial implications of their current approved drugs, but really more what the implication would be if they were to get a good Alzheimer's drug approved. So just going to go to their pipeline and show you guys what I mean. So they've got a lot of drugs out here. Looking at BACE1 inhibitors, so there's different ways that you can attack the Alzheimer's problem. I didn't talk about the gamma secretase, but there's different mechanisms involved in production of either A beta or involved in the tau hyperphosphorylation. So anyway, the important ones for today is aducanumab, which is very similar to BAN2401. The difference is that BAN2401 binds to the large protofibrils of A beta, whereas aducanumab is able to bind the oligomer form as well as the fibrils. So I would expect more efficacy. If this was the cause of Alzheimer's, I would expect more efficacy from this drug than the BAN2401. So I think there's a lot of potential, because this drug, I think, is in phase 2 right now. Has finished phase 2. Anyway, so this is their pipeline. They have a ton of drugs. So they're very much focused on neurodegeneration, and I think that if none of these are approved, I would be very surprised if none of these show positive data, because they're pretty much attacking the diseases from all angles regarding to all of the research that's been done in Alzheimer's up to date. So I think they have a high likelihood of success eventually. I don't know about the current, what they're looking at currently. So this is the aducanumab trial in a phase 1b, and they saw very positive data here. So let's just get into it. So I'll talk about a couple of the ways that we test for cognition. So there's the CDR-SB, the MMSE, the ADAS-Cog, and then Biogen has come up with a new ranking called, called the ADCOMS. So this is like a combination of two existing ranking systems, and they put it together to form their own that they think is more robust. So okay, so in here, looking at aducanumab, they see that at the higher doses they get an improvement compared to placebo. So placebo is the gray bar here, and they show that at least the 10 mg per kilogram they get an improvement in the CDR-SB, and they also get an improvement in the MMSE. So it's worsening if it's going up in the CDR-SB, and it's worse if it's going down in the MMSE. So what they also see is that the plaque reduction goes down. So they're seeing a positive outcome on what their drug targets. So if they see more, if they see less plaque in the actual brain, which they can do through a PET scan, or they can measure, I don't know exactly what it is, but they're able to measure a reduction in plaque, amyloid plaque in the brain, and they see this with their drug. Now, the magnitude to which the plaque reduction occurs and to which the benefits of the cognition occur isn't always correct. So we can see here that like the 6 mg per kg dose is actually worse than placebo in the MMSE, but the amount of plaque reduction is substantially lower than the placebo. So there's some little intricacies that I don't know how to resolve, and I think it might just be due to us not entirely understanding the disease itself. Okay, but in terms of the actual phase 2 data that came out yesterday, we saw like a litany of articles come out, and this is just one of them talking about how it's positive data, but when you look into the details, it's not quite that positive. So they announced about a month ago that they reanalyzed some data, and using traditional statistics, they were able to get a significant difference between placebo and their highest dose at their latest time point. And then they announced that they were going to reveal more data at the end of this month, so that was yesterday. So a little weird that they timed it like that, but it might just be due to the logistics of the conference. But anyway, so some of the slides that I took off Twitter, we're going to go through them, and I'll give you my thoughts on that. So one of the problems with the treatment is that the edema side effect can be quite severe in patients that have ApoE4 positivity. So patients who had that genotype were not allocated to the highest dose for risk of this life-threatening edema. And this was told to Biogen by the FDA to do. So at baseline, they had to collect all of this baseline data in terms of the MMSE and the ADAS-Cog and the ADCOMS and everything. And then as they went through the study, they decided to shift patients to the higher dose if they weren't responding as part of a way to get better statistical power if there was no effect in the lower dose. But the FDA said that they could not do this to the ApoE4 positive subjects because it was a danger for them given the edema. So that's what's shown here on the bottom right. And this has implications because if you think about the cognition statistics, the ApoE4 population is further along in their disease usually. They're more severe. So you could imagine that a baseline that includes these subjects is more likely to be worse off than a baseline that didn't have these ApoE4 positive subjects. So keep that in mind as we go through this, and it'll make sense when we see the actual data. So, and I don't have the numbers here, but I've seen on Twitter that about 70% of the patients were ApoE4 positive in the placebo, whereas in the treatment, it goes down to about 30% of patients. So just keep that in mind as we go through. But this was a pretty large study, 856, and they randomized them to a bunch of different doses of BAN2401. I think they used too many different treatment doses. They could have just picked fewer and gotten more power out of each specific dose. So I'm not too sure why they did that, but they did also announce that they were going to shift patients to the higher doses if they were ineffective. So that's at the discretion of the company. So here is another. This slide is kind of misleading to me because they're indicating that. Yeah, they're showing that it's the exact same demographically between the two, and this isn't entirely accurate. So, and I guess they have a star here, but this is a pretty important point, and I think it's worth highlighting this more if you're going to be putting this data out. So yeah, so they say here that the number of ApoE positive patients is the same at both, but I think what they mean to say is that at the low dose of BAN2401 treatments, these patients were also ApoE4 positive. So it was just in the highest dose that they weren't ApoE4 positive. So this isn't very relevant. It's not very relevant, this slide, because the effects that they saw were pretty much limited to the highest dose of BAN2401. So anyway, yeah, if we go further, so the different, what do I have here? So the different metrics that I have here are the ADCOMS, and they also looked at Okay, I don't have it up, but they looked at the CDR-SB as well as the ADAS-Cog. So the important one that they're sticking with, though, for them is the ADCOMS. So the CDR-SB was not significant between any of the groups for our purposes. They might have seen like a little time point that was changed, but they saw a difference in the ADAS-Cog and they saw one in the ADCOMS. And now, if we look here, they only see a difference in the highest dose, and this dose also happens to be the one that has very few ApoE4 positive patients. So people caught this, and they've been talking about it a lot on Twitter. So the p-value is at these different time points is like 0.034, and it needs to be under 0.05 for it to maintain statistical significance. And I think once they do subgroup analysis, they're going to see that this placebo line is in fact much closer to the 10 milligrams per kg biweekly line. And a lot of this effect is going to be insignificant. So, they should have been, the smart people working at this company. I don't know what they were thinking when they did this, because this is something that a lot of people caught and have been talking about on Twitter. And I think that this data, which they've told they're going to do a subgroup analysis and they're going to come back and tell everybody what the real significance is. So I don't know how they're going to get out of this, because the difference is not that high. The improvement is about 30%, they say. And, people were not going to be impressed with only about a 15 to 10% improvement from baseline and placebo. So that's kind of the issue right now, and we can wait to see what they come back with. But I think that the FDA is going to see this and be relatively hesitant to give them an early approval, and they might want to go on and do a phase 3 trial, but I think that would be a big waste of money at this point. I think their best bet would be to focus on aducanumab and see if that works. And if it doesn't do any better than placebo, then I think we're done with amyloid. I don't think there's much use in going further with this. And the 30% is nice, but if we look at the low doses, it does almost worse than placebo. And the lower doses have these ApoE4 positive patients in them as well. So yeah, so it's not great. It's not super impressive. Now, when it comes to the actual function of the drug, it does work. So it's not like they weren't hitting their target properly. They're getting a big decrease in the amount of amyloid. So I don't know exactly what this is measuring. Oh, so they're actually measuring the A beta protein in the cerebrospinal fluid. So if their drug is working, they would expect this. They would expect that they're reducing the amount of plaque and that the amyloid beta is going into the cerebrospinal fluid and the serum, and it's being processed that way. And this is what they're seeing. So especially at the 10 mg per kg dose, they're seeing a significant amount of this. And the amount of improvement in cognition and memory is not that huge. So given this huge p-value, the 0.0001, and the p-value for the actual cognition, this really just tells me that the amyloid beta hypothesis, it's not the right one, at least not for humans. Might be for mice, but not for humans. So, so when I say that I think we should go on with the aducanumab, it's because aducanumab is going to hit more of the A beta aggregates. So it's not just going to hit the protofibrils, but it's going to hit the oligomers as well, which might have an issue, which might be a more profound target when it comes to the disease progression. I think that's the only chance they have, really, because it's not, it's not worth continuing to pursue this otherwise. And now it might be additive in terms of if we combine this drug with a target to tau or something else, then it might be like this big effect that goes on, or the synergistic effect, but in and of itself, it doesn't look like it's not effective. Okay, so this just shows the amyloid burden as well. So they looked at it in different ways, and they saw, in fact, that the treatment lowers the amount of amyloid in the brain. So the other thing that makes me hesitant about the phase 3 trial is that this has been done before. So solanezumab was a Lilly product that did well in phase 2 and it failed in phase 3. They published on it in the New England Journal of Medicine, and this is what it looks like. So, there's a slight improvement to placebo, but nothing great. And this looks a lot like the actual data that we see in the trial from Biogen. So, not to belabor the point too much, but I don't know if it's worth continuing this drug in phase 3. So with that, I guess I just had the phase 1 trial here just to show that it worked. So they looked at a number of different metrics in phase 1, and they showed that the drug was effective, at least in reducing plaque in the brain. So we're going to see what the company says. They've told us that they're going to come back with a subgroup analysis and go from there. And we'll see if they try to talk to the FDA about what they want. But I've given my opinion, and I don't know. I don't think it's great to pursue. I think that they still have a lot of potential moving forward. So if you're looking at a dip to buy, this one might be it. I don't think that the company is done bleeding yet. Once we see that it confirms that there's no significant difference between placebo, I think that it has a lot more room to fall. If we look at the chart here, the early July is when we saw the big pump up based on the news, and we're still only at 340, which is pretty much where the day started after we heard about the pump up from the knowledge that they had positive data. So this could very easily fall back down to under 300. And, it's not to say that they don't have a lot of potential moving forward, as I think that they're trying to really target this disease. And I think we got to give them a lot of credit for that, because it's tough. It's super tough out there. There's been so many drugs that have failed to produce a change in Alzheimer's disease, and so much money that's poured into this that I really hope that somebody succeeds. I did a blog post about Axivant and their, I forget what the drug was called, but their failure in trying to improve symptoms. And a lot of these drugs are just trying to improve symptoms as well. So a company that's actually looking to change the outcome of the disease, I think, needs the public's full support, and we can hope for the best, but, it's got to actually show a noticeable change in the disease progression. And sadly for Biogen, I don't think this is the one that they want to. This is not the hill to die on, put it that way. But I think it's worth it for them to look further in their other targets, and we'll see from there. So I'm not going to take a position. I'm licking my wounds from the brutal XBI close today. Illumina did close pretty low, as well as a lot of other companies that I'm invested in. So I think next week I'll pick it up and show my portfolio, but suffice to say it's down enough. But I'm going to wrap it up there. Thanks a lot for watching, guys. Please tell a friend if they're interested in the biotech industry and want to get in there. And like, subscribe, or give me a comment. Let me know what you think. Let me know if I'm off on Biogen. I would love to talk about it in the comments. And thanks a lot for watching, and we'll see you next time.